It's a real pleasure to welcome back to our screen a wonderful member of our counseling department, Maggie Parker, who in her spare time has been doing some fascinating work on play therapy and related issues. I have to say, Maggie, besides everything else, first of all, if anybody wonders what it is about GShed, on the list of the 5 or 6 things that when people say, what do you love about GShed? One of those, right up near the top of the list, is that we have programs that are going into so many interesting areas. And, you know, it's funny, we talk about diversity, which is, of course, a big priority for us. But I keep being reminded of our intellectual diversity and our substantive diversity and the way in which we are reaching so many different populations and so many different sets of problems and challenges under this, you know, this heading of the word education and human development, or the phrase. And so here we're going to hear another just wonderful example of some of the richness of our school and of our faculty. And Maggie is an absolutely delightful addition to our family. And we're so happy that you are with us. And we're so happy that we're going to hear about some of your work. For those of you who don't yet know Maggie, you will get to know her for sure. She's a graduate of the University of Richmond and Southern Methodist University, and has her PhD from the University of North Texas. Texas is a small state in the, well, you know where Texas is. Anyway, Maggie, welcome to the Ecology of Education series, and we'll turn it over to you with great anticipation, and also with a warning, just relax, you're gonna be fine.
Yes, I tend to get very anxious before presentations, and then it usually melts away by 5 minutes in. So here we go. Thank you guys for being here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully that will work. Okay. So my name is Maggie Parker, and I am a licensed professional counselor. And I think I have also this crippling morality. So I'm going to just let you know, I did just recently get a call for the Association of Play Therapy, and I think I owe them money in order to be truly a registered play therapist supervisor as of today. But as long as I hand them in my check, I think I'm still good. So as of yesterday, I was indeed one. And I'm also a child-centered play therapist supervisor. So part of what Dean Fuhrer was saying is that I am from University of North Texas. And if you're in counseling and you go to University of North Texas, you do play therapy. It is the largest play therapy training program in the world. And so I'm really lucky to have gone there. And so I'm going to share a little bit about what I'm doing with play therapy and how I am using it in my research now. So I'm going to go over a lot of what I want to talk about today is what play therapy is, because I think it's often misunderstood, and it's not something that people really understand. It's used a lot in education settings with school counselors, and yet we don't really know what it is. And so I'd like the opportunity to share with you what it is and how it works before I share some of the results of my research that I've been doing with child-centered play therapy since I've come here, and then what my current research is and my future focus. And then, of course, time for questions and comments. So why play? Play is innate. It is universal. Everyone plays. It is something that all children do, that all adults do, and it occurs everywhere. So this is something that occurs in refugee camps. This is something that occurs throughout different cultures and countries and throughout time. It is pleasurable and it is voluntary. And I think that's also really important. It's not goal directed. Because in today's society, We often are taking kids to and from different activities, and it's often sports. So it may not be voluntary, and it's definitely goal directed. So you're going from one to another. There is a winner and a loser. That is not inherently what play is. And play mimics important and purposeful experiences and behaviors in children's lives. And it occurs in safe and non-threatening environments. So if a child is in an unsafe place, if they are in an abusive environment, play is not present. And that's something that's really important to note. Play is also how children learn. And there's multiple, a lot of research out there. I think a lot of times people think of play as being very frivolous. And throughout history, we've kind of gone back and forth if play is important and play isn't. And the American Academy of Pediatrics has come out to say that, nope, play is very important, and that's how children learn. And so this idea of sitting in a desk and learning isn't necessarily the best way in which to engage children in their development. And if you think about even a young infant, a little baby who is just born, when they are jerking around and moving and trying to suck their hands and playing with their feet, that is play, and that is how they're learning where their body is and where their body ends. When they play peekaboo with a caregiver, when they engage, children learn about relationships within play, right? Well, I'm hearing this a lot now. If you don't do this, then I'm not going to be your friend. And usually that doesn't work. And so they have to find other ways to manage relationships and expectations. So play is really purposeful, and it's how children learn and how they gain their cognitive, emotional, and physical development. And so really the fundamental aspects of play is that toys are their words and play is their language. So this is how they communicate as well. And so taking what we understand about play and then centering it into child-centered play therapy. So play therapy is a mental health intervention that uses toys and play materials to meet the developmental needs of children. It is a trauma-informed and neurobiologically sound intervention for children. And it aligns with what children already find pleasurable. And so if you think about it, if we were to ask children to sit down in therapy and to talk to us, we are expecting them to meet us where we are. We are expecting them to move out of their developmental range, out of their cognitive ability, and to meet us where we are. But by using play, we are able to communicate with them through their language and where they are developmentally. And with child-centered, it is an extension of Carl Rogers' person-centered theory of personality and change, where the focus is on the relationship. And so what a lot of the research has demonstrated about counseling is that the relationship is the strongest agent of change in counseling. And while many theories of counseling recognize that change occurs within this relationship, within person-centered and within child-centered, the relationship is both necessary and sufficient for client growth. And so it is within this relationship between a play therapist and a child that a child is able to innately grow towards their potential. And as a child-centered play therapist, I have an innate belief that children are capable of growth, and that within this relationship, that they have the ability within themselves to meet their needs in that way. and an innate trust in their own capacity. And so when I'm in the playroom, what I am trying to relay to a child is, I'm here, I hear you, I understand, and I care. I am here means that I am fully present, that when I am with you, I am not trying to evaluate what you're doing. I am not trying to judge or understand necessarily. I am just trying to be with you in this moment. I'm not analyzing you. This is really hard. It's hard to sit with a child, especially a child who maybe doesn't talk to you and just plays. For someone who gets easily distracted like myself, I have to work very hard to be present in every moment with that child. And it's really interesting. I had a friend, a colleague, tell me that she had a child who would always have her back to the therapist, to my friend. And, you know, she would always be present and I'm here, I'm with you. And the second that her mind wandered, probably to like think about a grocery list, that little girl like whipped around and was like, what are you doing? So they can tell when you're present and when you are focused on them. And when I hear you, it's not just that I'm listening to what you're saying. I am truly working to understand all of the messages, all the communication that you're providing me, from your words, from your behaviors, from your facial expressions, from the toys that you are using and the ways in which you're using them. That I am truly paying attention and listening and seeing you for that. And that I understand that I'm working to see you and understand you from your perspective. That I'm taking all these aspects of who you are to understand who you are. I'm taking the pieces that you're giving me to do so, and that I care. And when you have a relationship with someone, and I invite you to reflect back on your own relationships of when someone truly loves you for you with no strings attached, that they can see who you are and the faults in which you have and truly care and accept you. It's one of the most powerful experiences, and it releases that dynamic potential in a child, and allows them to experience themselves. And so my job is to observe the child and to trust in the child, to discover what I don't know and that I don't even know that I don't know it, and to not make assumptions. It's easy to make assumptions about children, especially from parents or teachers or IEP meetings. You're getting all of this information from everyone. And in that room, that information just needs to be white noise that you place outside. And in that room, it's you and the child and the toys. And then you're focusing on the child and not the problem. And when you're there, you're able to focus in the present and explore their feelings rather than their thoughts or their actions. And you're understanding rather than explaining. You're not trying to solve their problems, because I believe that they are capable of solving their problems themselves. And so you're wanting to accept rather than correct. And sometimes that's really hard, especially, as a parent, that's really tough. And, and as a teacher, that's really hard. And I think, that's where being a therapist, it's a really unique perspective that you get to be in. And if you think about, if you've had a bad day, whether it be at work or with friends or at home, and you call someone up to tell them what happened, say you get in trouble at your job and at our job, work in some place. Do you want the person that you're calling to say, what did you do wrong? What could you do differently? Or that really hurt? And so in the playroom, I'm going to say that really hurt, because I'm trying to understand the child. Now, one thing that I do think that I know is important to discuss is, while we recognize that play is universal across children, across culture, there is an understanding or a belief system within child-centered play therapy specifically that it is a multiculturally aware intervention, and that it can work across cultures. And there has been research. A lot of the play therapy research includes minoritized children within samples with considerable effects. But it is a theory that was created by a white male, developed and perpetuated by white women, white females, based upon a counseling understanding and developmental theory and diagnostic criteria that were created by white perspectives and with white clients in mind. And so this kind of this idea that it's multiculturally aware and applicable is kind of this idea that, well, if we work with other cultures and they meet, like they have to then come meet this standard, as opposed to going and working with other cultures and understanding their experiences and meeting them where they are, instead of asking them to meet us where we are, which is kind of antithetical to what play therapy is, where we are trying to go into the room and meet children where they are. And so it's something that needs to be addressed and be explored. Furthermore, not sure if that was the greatest place to put that, but I did want to recognize that and have that as part of this exploration. So if we're meeting a child where they are and we are accepting them for who they are, then we are giving them permission to change. And so if you've ever been with an adult or a person who felt like they're wasn't genuine and like there were strings attached, you're really guarded, because you're like, I don't really get you and I don't trust you, and what's your motive here, right? And kids can pick up on that too. And so if you're with an adult who truly accepts you and cares for you, then it gives you a permission to explore those aspects of yourself that maybe you were too anxious or scared to look at before. And so when they're able to do that, they can explore themselves and their self-worth and recognize their capabilities and abilities, and then begin that innate growth process that every child and every person, I believe, is capable of doing. And this is hard. It's not always easy to accept the child for who they truly are, especially children that are hurting, because children who are hurting are using behaviors to let us know how much they're hurting. And sometimes those behaviors are difficult. I had a client who spent the whole 45 minutes of our sessions trying to hurt me and succeeding in many cases. And I had to remember that this was not who the child was. This is what the child was trying to express to me, and accept that the child was hurting while setting limits on the behaviors that I'm not for hurting, and accept that and still have empathy and care for him. It can be really hard. And you're trying to be a different type of person in the playroom, right? One who's accepting of a child, even though they want to hurt you, or they don't like you, or they yell at you. And if you think about when you speak to children, we're going to think about, like, what do you say when was the last time you had a conversation with a child, and what did it look like? And I'm guessing that there was a lot of, hey, how are you? What was your day like? What did you do? Did you have fun? Was it exciting? Who did you play with? What did you eat? Everything is a question. And a child-centered play therapist won't ask questions, because when we ask a question, we tell a child inherently that we don't know. We tell them what we want to hear. We don't let them the opportunity to tell us what they're excited about, or what they like, or what they engage in, or And we're directing them in that way. And we are also learning about, we want to learn about the child. We don't necessarily need to learn about their experiences. And I think sometimes this is hard for parents and school systems to understand, in that they want us to like talk specifically about like a certain behavior or a certain event or a certain trauma. But the child, I have an innate trust, and in my experience, it has come forward that they will be able to process and experience that without my telling them that they have to. And inherently, by me telling them that they have to is probably going to keep them from doing so. And so why do we use play? Because without play materials, I can only talk to you about what happened last week. But with play, I can experience and actively relate to it in the immediacy of that child's experience within the playroom. And so what's happening in the playroom is what I'm responding to in that moment. And so their play is the metaphor, and their processing. Remember, if toys are their words and play is their language, they are using these materials to process and express and engage. And I am able to immediately respond to that in real time. The emotions that arise, the content that comes, and the experiences in which they are reflecting. So this is the playroom that I trained in. I have never seen another playroom like these. Again, this is at University of North Texas, so it's kind of like the Mecca. It's lovely because everything can be washed, and it's no big deal if something gets broken, except for this two-way mirror that's over here that actually a child threw a hammer at, which was a little intense, but yeah, that's fine. So in here, the toys are, we have certain toys that are specially curated for emotional expression. There are no electronic toys or toys that would keep a child out of the relationship. There are no games, which would inherently create a winner and a loser. There are toys for creative expression. There's paint, musical instruments. There are real life toys. There is a cash register, a medical kit, which is very important to have right now with COVID. A kitchen, nurturing. There are sand, which is really nurturing and sensory processing. Over here, you can't see, well, the bot bag you can see, and over here are aggressive toys like guns and swords and knives and handcuffs. And there's imaginative play, puppets, and they're all out in the open. They're all very readily available. There's not a ton of toys, but they're kind of set out and grouped together. And it's so that children don't have to search for the words that they need. And they're also nondescript. And so I'm not going to name what something is. I use a lot of this and them, or this and that. Oh, you picked that up. Oh, you wanted to do this, because then I maintain the metaphor that the child is using. And so a perfect example of this and the importance of the metaphor, one of my colleagues was telling me she was working with a little girl whose father had recently had been murdered in a gun violence. And she picked up the gun, the little girl picked up the gun, and my friend was like, oh geez, here we go. And put it towards her head, and then the little girl proceeded to blow dry her hair because it looked like a hair dryer. And had the play therapist said, oh, you picked up that gun, that would have immediately taken the child out of the metaphor in which she was engaged in. And so you want to stay in the metaphor so that the child is expressing themselves in the way that they feel comfortable through their play. And the other skills that we use in this room to help children facilitate and express and work towards their innate healing, we reflect what they're doing and what they're saying, and everything goes back to them. Like, so if they say something like, oh, I've seen this before, or I know what this is, and I would say, oh, you've seen that before, or you know how that works. So I always end in you. You're really curious about this. If I do a lot of feeling words, you're really angry, you're really frustrated, you're scared, that baby doll is nervous, you really love that, you want to protect them, because children use behaviors to express and let other people know what they're feeling, because they don't often have the words to share, right? Toys are their words, play is their language. They don't have the verbiage to share. And a lot of times in therapy, adults don't know how to share their feelings. And so when we reflect back what they're feeling, they're able to then connect what they're experiencing in their body and the emotion that they're having in a word, so that hopefully they don't have to use those behaviors in the future to let people know how they feel, that they can reflect, I feel sad instead. You're also enlarging the meaning. So for instance, like taking themes, like I had a little girl who painted hearts every single session, who was trying to process some stuff that I'm not going to share what, but you know, and so like I would say, you know, love is really important to you. And so that's like enlarging what that meaning is. Returning responsibility is an opportunity to help children develop pride and self-esteem. I was yesterday in a presentation on child-centered play therapy with children with disabilities, and they were talking about a little girl, I think it was spina bifida. She was in a wheelchair, and adults tend to do things for children that they can do for themselves. And so don't do anything for a child that they can do for themselves. It's kind of the adage in the playroom. So this little girl dropped a water bottle, and the play therapist was right behind her wheelchair, and then all the adults were behind the play therapist, and she dropped a water bottle, and all of the adults behind jumped up, and the play therapist was like, no. She put her arms up and she goes, if you need help, you can tell us. And the little girl was able to do it on her own and put the water bottle in the trash can. And when a child is able to do something for themselves, there's a developed sense of pride and innate ability that's so important, that they're capable and that you trust them to do those things. And I think that's also really important, that they're not always afforded in other experiences. There's also limit setting, because not all behaviors are accepted. Even though I let a lot of behaviors happen in this room, I do set limits to protect the toys, to protect the child, to protect myself, and to protect the relationship, and reality testing. So like, I'm okay. I know that, you know, I've had students, not in this room, but in another room that was a little bit sturdier, where they would like climb up on this and jump down. And I think my only limit was like, if you choose to do that, you choose to jump away from the sandbox, because I knew they were okay. Or like, I would have them blindfold me, handcuff me, and turn off the lights, which was fine, which demonstrates trust, that I like inherently trusted the child. And I had to very much trust the child, and I did. You know, but I also set limits. I'm not for hurting. Toys aren't for breaking. You know, I'm trying to think. Toys are for staying in the room. I have a little boy who really likes to take the toys home. I'm like, I know you really like to take this home, but that's for staying in the room. And the way we do it is like, just like that, like, people aren't for hitting. It's non-negotiable. It's not a rule. It's just point blank, people aren't for hitting. And so that doesn't really set up like any pushback or argument or negotiation, because that is what it is. People aren't for hitting. I'm not for hurting. And then the last is encouragement versus praise. And that helps really, it's kind of like an internal versus external locus of control. And so when we praise, we usually praise a product. So that's beautiful, or you got an A, versus like you worked really hard on that. And in a lot of our society, we really focus a lot on the product. And so wanting to kind of shift away from that in the playroom so that they can develop this internal locus of control and be proud of the things that of their effort, as opposed to the product of what they've done. And do things because for them as opposed to for other people. And when we focus on a play, we learn so much about the child. They begin to play out their experiences and the way in which they respond and react, and the needs that they have, their perceptions about their lives. You know, it's so amazing. One of the more powerful stories, a little boy had cancer, and he took the big dinosaur and put like soldiers in the mouth and soldiers all around, you know, and the dinosaur still died. And he was processing his own death, knowing that no matter how many soldiers there were, that this was going to happen. And you know, like there's just so many instances where these kids are using these toys and just processing their experiences. And it's just so powerful and amazing and just so awe-inspiring that they allow us to be part of their journey. I just feel so lucky that I'm able to be a part of it. We already went over the skills that we use. We don't just sit there and watch the child play. They're not just hanging out. I think a lot of times people are like, parents too, kind of sometimes use play therapy as like a, you know, like, okay, well, you got in trouble, so you can't go to play. And it's like, well, I mean, yeah, play is fun, but like, they're also working on stuff that's really hard. And like, it's just like going to therapy. Yeah, I really think therapy is important and it's helpful and it's cathartic, but it's not always like, oh my gosh, I just love it. You know, sometimes it's painful and it's tearful and it's work. And play therapy is the same. And we look at it from like a neurobiological and trauma lens. Children who have experienced trauma, they have chronic stress, which creates difficulty in regulating their internal states. And so they have a lot of like anxiety and aggression, and they have difficulty understanding what's happening. And so what's really wonderful about play therapy is that it's predictable. The play therapist is always going to respond in the same way. The toys are always going to be in the same spot. The toys are always going to be the same. And they're able to process their experience through the metaphor, that they don't have to relive or discuss the trauma in which they've engaged in or they've experienced, that they can use metaphor to protect themselves and create safety around that. And they may not even know that they're processing their trauma. And then, you know, when you have an unsafe attachment or trauma from you're usually stuck in that hyper arousal, and it's hard to adapt to other environments. And so it interferes with their ability to engage in healthy and meaningful relationships, and it impacts their ability to learn and their health. And they have blocked trust. It's hard for them to understand what's safe and what's not, because they've had for so long to like protect themselves. And so when in the playroom, when you're a different type of person and a different type of adult, and you meet that defensiveness with openness and understanding, it shifts, it kind of shifts their response, and it's something different. And it can override that neurological response that drives their pain-based learning and releases them from that opioid system, or like it releases the opioid system that's enjoyable as opposed to that pain-based learning, and helps more in that impulse control. And so like, I think an example of this, that may be helpful to kind of explain this a little bit more is like I worked in and this is just a silly example. I worked in a juvenile detention setting, and I had a child who well, every one of the children that I saw there had pretty extreme trauma. And they were acting out and they were yelling, and the guards just kept yelling, and then she kept yelling, and then they yelled, and then she yelled, and it was like this fight, and she was dysregulated, and they were scared that she was going to fight. And so they locked her behind her door. So she was basically in solitary. And then she was screaming and yelling, and they were scared she was going to hurt herself. And so they called me, and they're like, hey, doc, can you come on down? I'm like, okay. And I like kind of looked around, and the guards are still yelling at this child. And I just, there's a window, and I just put my hand on the window. And she put her hand on the window, and we just looked at each other, and she calmed down. And I was like, later the guards were like, how'd you do that? And I was like, this child doesn't need to be yelled at. This child needs to be accepted and cared for and shown that someone loves her. And, I met her with openness and understanding and empathy. And when I did that, she was able to calm down. If you want to, they used to be like, we're going to jump you. And I'm like, okay, cool. And they're like, what are you going to do? And I was like, I'm going to lie in the fetal position until someone comes. Like, I'm not going to hurt you. I care about you. And it kind of takes away some of that defensiveness because I'm a different type of adult. And Bruce Perry, who is one of the leading researchers on neurobiology and trauma, talks about the importance of and how play therapy is something that can be really beneficial because it helps play therapists help the child self-regulate, and they don't allow the child's emotions to truly impact their own, that they're able to like remain calm, and helps the child move from dysregulation to a regulated emotional state. And they need to feel safe in that relationship. And so when they're able to engage in that self-directed play with access to physically interact with those materials, they can do all of these things while also using metaphor. And so it can be really, really beneficial. Okay, so then how does all of this relate to my research? So play therapy is not really well understood, and it's not necessarily well respected. I wish that we called it something other than play therapy, because I feel like a lot of people hear play and they just think frivolous and not helpful. And that's just not true. And part of it is because it's hard to engage in large randomized control trials. It takes longer than CBT, which is kind of the gold standard. So, instead of 6 sessions, most research on CCPT says that it takes about 8 to 16 sessions in order to see results. And the insurance panels don't usually like that. And the relationship and magic of play therapy is kind of hard to quantify. It was manualized in 2009. 2011 by D. Ray out of UNT. And so we're working towards that. But there's still some gaps. And so, one of the things is the current research that's occurring in child-centered play therapy. The majority of it comes out of University of North Texas. And then, you have all these graduates from University of North Texas going to different universities and trying to set up play therapy programs and doing play therapy research. And the fact of the matter is that at UNT, you have at least 3 or 4 play therapy courses occurring each semester. And so you just have hordes of master students ready to go into all of the schools and do all this play therapy. And so you just are running play therapy intervention trials pretty frequently. And that's just not feasible. And so I wanted to kind of explore, like, what can I do at GW to continue to advance the field of play without having hordes of master students to go and do my bidding, to go and do my play therapy bidding. And so I kind of looked at what is the current like CCPT research and looking at the California Clearinghouse of evidence-based practice, we have individual and group child-centered play therapy are probably efficacious for anxiety and probably efficacious for disruptive behaviors. And it's been adapted for some things. And so it lacks a strong research base. Most, again, is conducted at UNT, and they don't use diagnosis, and there are small sample sizes. So when I was thinking about what can I do, I consulted with methodologists and leaders in the field, and I thought meta-analyses and systematic reviews with specific populations and inclusion criteria would be a great way to contribute. And so that's what I did. So I started looking, most of the meta-analyses on disruptive behaviors and trauma, which is what I was looking at, and they are kind of infused because many children who've experienced trauma exhibit disruptive behaviors. Disruptive behaviors is a tough, like, I guess, I can't think of the word, thing to kind of pinpoint. And so I kind of looked at these and I wanted to see what CCPT is excluded from most literature on them. And a lot of the reason why is because they don't require diagnoses for inclusion. So it's like the studies would say like children referred for disruptive behaviors or externalizing behaviors, or children referred, like children who divorced parents or children who survived an earthquake, but they didn't require like a PTSD diagnosis or an ADHD diagnosis in order to engage. And I personally think that that's best practice because externalizing behaviors can occur in a lot of different diagnoses, but we don't need to talk about that. And so we started looking at all of these, and okay, so here's what we found. We had 23 studies of CCPT from 1999 to 2018, 19, and 17 were peer reviewed, and with a total of 904 participants. And so what we found was, interestingly, when compared to no treatment, there was a small but significant, it was a small effect size, but it was significant with a fail-safe N of 42. But when we compared it to an alternative treatment, there's a medium effect size of 0.56. So, which means that like play therapy had a larger effect when compared to an alternative, which is strange because usually an alternative treatment means that you're engaging in a relationship, which you would assume would mean that you would have a lower effect. But that was not the case. There was also a medium effect size for total behaviors when compared to no treatment, but a small effect size when looking at aggressive behaviors. It's also important to know that only 4 studies looked at aggressive behaviors. When I began submitting this manuscript I submitted it to a psychology journal, and the feedback was, well, why do we need child-centered play therapy when we have CBT? And so I went on the hunt, and I was like, well, actually, there was another meta-analysis of CBT with disruptive behaviors. And even though we can't, compare effect sizes because there are different methodological analyses or statistical analyses, we both had the similar effect sizes, with medium effect sizes for externalizing in total and small for aggressive. And only 4 looked at aggressive behaviors, and those are also comorbid with other disorders. And I also think this is important to look at because aggressive behaviors this is a new area of my research that I'm going into, is that how often are aggressive behaviors actually sent to the school counselor or mental health profession, and how often are they actually sent to discipline? Because I think it's this understanding, I think people mistakenly view aggressive behaviors as a discipline problem when it's truly a mental health problem. And I'm wondering how that impacted the research that I was doing. And then when I looked at the trauma, It's excluded again on most mental health interventions because it doesn't include PTSD as a participation criteria. But we found 32 studies, which I think this is a problem, is that majority of them are published in International Journal of Play Therapy. So we're kind of insular, we're staying inside. But the things that were explored included, or the ACEs that were explored included discrimination, immigration, poverty, adoption, chronic illness, and incarceration. And many of them reported significant results. And what I'm doing actually with this study, also, I think it's interesting, if you look, the other outcome variables included parental empathy, and 100% reported significant results, which either says that the assessment that we're using is not helpful, or it also speaks to the focus on the relationship. And so that particular variable is using, where we teach parents how to use child-centered play therapy with their children. And so whenever that happens, parents are able to see, according to the research, parents see their children differently and through a different lens, and have 100% reported significant results in increasing parental empathy. Again, both of these studies, we looked at racial and ethnic differences and gender differences, and both identified really strong effect sizes, or many of the studies reported strong effect sizes for children from minoritized groups. And again, it's like, okay, is that because play is universal and it's beneficial, or, you know, is there something else happening? And I think we need to really, as a field, explore what we're doing, and if what we're doing is really an anti-racist, anti-colonial lens, and how we can bring the field up to date in that way, recognizing that as a white cisgender straight woman, that I may not be the person who needs, or I don't know. I'm just recognizing my own identities in that as I begin to explore how I'm perpetuating or engaging in those relationships. So my next steps in research is taking that systematic review, and we are currently trying to figure out, we're in the middle of the data analysis for a meta-analysis for the child-centered play therapy with adverse childhood experiences. And I would love to begin doing intervention research where we explore the neurobiological impacts of child-centered play therapy with children, specifically children with trauma and children with neurobiological differences. And then looking at train the trainer models, because right now we train teachers and we train parents, and it's like done specifically like within a play therapist supervising a teacher, or a play therapist supervising a parent. And I think that this understanding of how to see children, or how to see people just inherently within the relationship, can be really powerful and can be infused within classrooms, and, you know, training school personnel, as the school counselor in me wants to train school personnel and teachers in this as well.